Maya's alarm clock screamed at 5:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 3 months. She rolled out of bed, her body aching from yesterday's double shift. The tiny apartment she shared with her parents felt even smaller in the early morning darkness. Through the thin walls, she could hear her mother already moving around in the kitchen, preparing for her own long day at the cleaning company. "Morning, Mama," Maya whispered as she grabbed her work uniform from the chair. The black dress and white apron were wrinkled but clean. She had exactly one spare uniform, and laundry was a luxury she planned carefully around her work schedule. Her mother looked up from packing lunch. "You working late again tonight, Misha?" "Yeah, double shift. We need the money for Diego's treatment." Next week, Maya's voice was tired but determined. Her 17-year-old brother had been in and out of hospitals for months, and the medical bills kept growing like weeds after rain. The bus ride to downtown took 40 minutes. Maya used this time to close her eyes and rest, but sleep never came easily. Her mind was always calculating. Rent money, Diego's medication, groceries, bus fare. Every dollar had a purpose before she even earned it. Lumiere restaurant sat on the corner of 5th and Main, its glass windows gleaming even in the early morning light. Maya had been lucky to get this job. The pay was better than her previous restaurant work, and the tips from wealthy customers could sometimes cover Diego's prescriptions for a week. She entered through the staff door, greeting Carlos the cook and Mrs. Patterson the manager. The restaurant was beautiful in the morning quiet. Soft lighting cast gentle shadows across white tablecloths and polished silverware. And there, in the center of the dining room, sat the grand piano. Maya had noticed it on her first day. The instrument was gorgeous, its black surface reflecting the crystal chandelier above. She'd asked Mrs. Patterson about it during her training. "Oh, that old thing?" The previous owner left it. "We keep meaning to get someone to play it, but most pianists want too much money. It just sits there looking pretty now." Maya knew how to play. Her grandmother had taught her when she was 7, and she'd taken lessons until she was 15. But that was before life got complicated, before Diego got sick, before every moment became about survival instead of dreams. Sometimes, during quiet moments between customers, Maya would walk past the piano and imagine sitting at the bench. Her fingers would twitch slightly, remembering the feel of smooth keys beneath her touch. But those moments never lasted long. There was always another table to serve, another order to take. Friday nights at Lumiere were always busy. Rich people came to see and be seen, spending more on one meal than Maya's family spent on groceries in a month. She'd learned not to think too hard about the waste she cleaned from their plates. Around 7 o'clock, Mrs. Patterson approached her station. "Maya, I need you to take table 12 tonight. It's a big party, VIP treatment. The gentleman specifically requested our best server." Table 12 was the large round table near the piano. Maya straightened her apron and checked her reflection in the polished serving tray. She looked professional, even if she felt exhausted. The party arrived 15 minutes later. 5 men in expensive suits, all talking loudly about stocks and investments. Maya recognized the type immediately. They had that confident swagger that came with never having to check their bank balance before buying something. But one man stood out from the group. He was younger than the others, maybe 35, with sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. While his companions ordered wine without looking at prices, he studied the menu carefully. While they joked loudly, he watched the other diners with curious intensity. "Good evening, gentlemen. I'm Maya, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." She set down water glasses with practiced efficiency. "Can I start you with drinks or appetizers?" The sharp-eyed man looked up at her directly. "What do you recommend? And please, be honest. Don't just suggest the most expensive items." Maya was surprised by the question. Most customers either knew exactly what they wanted or asked for the priciest options to show off. The salmon is actually really fresh today. Carlos, our chef, got it from a local supplier this morning. And the mushroom risotto is probably the best thing on our menu, though people don't order it much because it's not flashy. Interesting. You've actually tried the food here? Staff meals, Maya explained simply. Carlos makes sure we know what we're serving. The man smiled, and it seemed genuine rather than the polite fake smiles she usually got from wealthy customers. I'm Alexander, by the way. And you're right about people not ordering based on quality. His friends were getting impatient, so Maya took the rest of their orders quickly. Alexander ordered the risotto. The others went for steaks and expensive wine, just as she'd expected. As the evening progressed, Maya found herself paying attention to Alexander's table more than usual. He didn't talk as much as his companions, but when he did speak, the others listened. There was something about him that commanded respect without demanding it. During the main course, disaster struck. Maya was refilling water glasses when one of Alexander's friends made a sudden gesture while telling a story. His elbow caught her wrist, and the water pitcher tilted, sending a stream of ice water directly onto a stack of papers in front of Alexander. Oh no, I'm so sorry. Maya immediately grabbed her towel and started blotting the water, but the damage was done. The papers were soaked, ink running in blue streams across what looked like important business documents. Alexander's friends erupted in anger. Are you kidding me? Those were the Shanghai contracts. One of them shouted. Do you have any idea how important those documents were? Maya's heart pounded as she continued trying to save the papers. This was exactly the kind of mistake that got people fired. I'm so sorry, sir. Let me get some napkins, maybe we can. Forget it, another man snapped. The deal's off now. We'll have to reschedule everything. But Alexander remained calm. While his associates complained loudly, he watched Maya's face. She wasn't making excuses or trying to blame his friend for the collision. She was genuinely distressed and working frantically to fix what couldn't be fixed. It's all right, Alexander said quietly, and somehow his voice carried over the complaints of his friends. These things happen. Maya looked up at him, surprised. But the documents were copies. The originals are safe in my office. He gathered the soggy papers calmly. Though I have to ask you something. Maya braced herself for the complaint. The demand to speak to her manager. The threat that would probably cost her this job. Instead, Alexander glanced toward the piano. I noticed you looking at that instrument earlier. Do you play? The question caught Maya completely off guard. Around them, the restaurant continued its Friday night buzz, but suddenly she felt like she and Alexander were having a private conversation in a crowded room. I used to, when I was younger. Maya twisted her towel nervously. But not anymore. I haven't played in years. What kind of music did you play? Maya wondered why he was asking, but something in his tone made her answer honestly. Classical. Mostly. Some jazz. My grandmother taught me traditional songs from Mexico, but like I said, that was a long time ago. Alexander's friends were still grumbling about the papers, but he seemed completely focused on Maya's answers. Would you play something for us? The request hit Maya like a physical blow. Oh no, sir, I couldn't. I'm working, and I really don't remember much anymore. I'm sure you remember more than you think. Alexander's voice was pleasant but persistent. Just one song. Something simple. Maya glanced around nervously. Other diners were starting to notice their conversation. Mrs. Patterson was watching from across the room with a concerned expression. I really can't, sir. I have other tables to serve, and I'll make it worth your while. Alexander reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. Let's say $200 for one song. Maya's breath caught. $200 was more than she made in tips on most nights. That money could buy Diego's medication and still leave enough for groceries. But playing piano in front of all these people? She hadn't performed for anyone since her grandmother's funeral 5 years ago. And even then she'd barely gotten through the song without crying. "I don't know, sir. I'm really not prepared to." 300. Alexander's voice was still pleasant, but there was something underneath it now. A businessman's confidence that everyone had a price. Maya felt trapped between her desperate need for money and her fear of public embarrassment. Around the restaurant, she could sense people beginning to watch their table with interest. The normal dinner conversation was getting quieter as patrons tried to eavesdrop on the unusual negotiation. Alexander seemed to sense her hesitation and pressed his advantage. "You know what? Let's make this interesting for everyone." He raised his voice slightly, addressing not just Maya but the nearby tables as well. "This young lady is going to play piano for us. If she can get the entire restaurant to stop talking and listen, I'll make it $500. Now Maya felt like every eye in the restaurant was on her. Mrs. Patterson was walking over, probably to intervene, but Alexander held up a hand to stop her. "It's quite all right. Maya here is going to give us a little concert. Aren't you, Maya?" It wasn't really a question anymore. Maya's legs felt like jelly as she walked toward the piano. Every step seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet restaurant. She could feel dozens of eyes following her movement, and her heart hammered so hard she wondered if people could hear it. Piano bench was exactly the right height, just like her grandmother's old upright back home. Maya sat down and stared at the keys. They were perfect, pristine white and black squares that seemed to mock her with their silence. When was the last time she'd actually played? Diego's birthday 2 years ago, maybe 3? She placed her hands on the keys and immediately pulled them back. They were shaking too much. Behind her, she could hear Alexander's friends whispering among themselves, probably making bets about whether she'd actually go through with it. "Take your time," Alexander called out, but there was an edge to his voice that suggested his patience had limits. Maya closed her eyes and tried to remember what her grandmother used to tell her. "Music doesn't come from your fingers, Mia. It comes from your heart. Let your heart remember, and your fingers will follow." She thought about the easiest piece she knew, something she'd played 1,000 times as a child. Fur Elise by Beethoven. Every piano student learned it. Simple melody, familiar rhythm. If she was going to embarrass herself, at least it would be with something she knew by heart. Maya placed her hands on the keys again, this time forcing them to stay put despite the trembling. She found middle C and let her fingers find their positions. The first few notes came out hesitant and quiet, barely audible over the restaurant's background noise, but then something magical happened. As soon as she heard those familiar opening notes, her muscle memory kicked in. Her fingers seemed to remember exactly where to go, even though her mind was still panicked. The melody began to flow more smoothly, each note connecting to the next like old friends meeting after a long separation. Restaurant didn't go silent, but the noise level dropped a bit. A few people near the piano turned their heads to listen. Maya felt a tiny spark of confidence and pressed the keys a little harder, letting the melody carry across the room. She made it through the first movement without any major mistakes. Her fingers stumbled once or twice, but she recovered quickly. When she finished, there was polite applause from the tables closest to the piano. Not the whole restaurant, but not complete silence either. Maya turned on the bench to face Alexander. "There, I played something." But Alexander was shaking his head, a disappointed look on his face. "That was nice, Maya. Pleasant background music. But I said if you could get the whole restaurant to stop and listen, you'd earn $500. He gestured around the dining room, where conversations had already resumed and servers were moving between tables again. Nobody stopped eating. Nobody put down their phones. You played perfectly fine dinner music, but you didn't move anyone. Alexander stood up and walked over to the piano, speaking loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I was hoping for something. With real feeling, something that would make people care." Maya felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She'd done what he asked, hadn't she? She'd played a complete piece without falling apart. What more did he want? I don't understand, she sighed quietly. I played the song correctly. Correctly, yes. But correctly isn't the same as meaningfully. Alexander leaned against the piano, and Maya noticed that several other diners were openly watching their conversation now. Anyone can play the right notes in the right order. But real music, music that matters, comes from somewhere deeper. One of Alexander's friends called out from the table, "Come on, Alex." The girl did her best. "Just give her the money and let's order dessert." But Alexander ignored him. He was focused entirely on Maya, studying her face like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "You know what? Let's make this more interesting. I'll double the offer. $1,000 if you can play something that makes this entire room go completely silent." Maya's breath caught. $1,000. That wasn't just Diego's medication money. That was 3 months of rent, or a semester of community college classes, or enough to fix their car that had been sitting broken in the parking lot for 2 months. But the pressure was enormous now. Half the restaurant was watching, including Mrs. Patterson, who looked like she wanted to rescue Maya but didn't know how without making things worse. "I don't know if I can do what you're asking," Maya said honestly. "I'm just a waitress who used to take piano lessons. I'm not a professional musician." "That's exactly why I think you might be able to do it," Alexander replied. "Professional musicians play what they're trained to play. But you've lived a real life. You've struggled. You've had to make hard choices. That kind of experience can create music that touches people's hearts." Maya looked down at the keys again. Alexander was asking her to do something she'd never done before, to play not just the notes, but to somehow pour her feelings into the music. The problem was, she wasn't sure she wanted these strangers to see that deep into her life. "What if I can't do it?" she asked. "What if I try and still can't make people stop and listen?" "Then you get nothing," Alexander said simply. "That's how challenges work. But I have a feeling you're capable of more than you think you are." Maya felt trapped between 2 impossible choices. Play it safe and walk away with nothing, or risk total humiliation for a chance at money that could change her family's life. She thought about Diego again. But this time she remembered not just his illness, but who he was before he got sick. He used to beg her to play piano when she came home from school. He'd sit on the floor next to the bench and listen with his eyes closed, completely absorbed in whatever she was playing. "You make the sad songs beautiful," he'd told her once when she was practicing a particularly melancholy piece. "It's like you understand what the music is trying to say." Maybe that was what Alexander meant. Maybe he wanted her to play something that said something real, instead of just demonstrating that she could hit the right keys at the right time. Maya turned back to the piano and let her fingers hover over the keys. What song could she play that came from her heart instead of just her memory? What music could she offer that would mean something to strangers who lived completely different lives than hers? Then she remembered a piece she'd never played for anyone. Something she'd composed herself during the worst time in her life, when her father had been laid off and they'd almost lost their apartment. She'd been 16, scared and angry at the world, and she'd sat at her grandmother's piano and let all those feelings pour out through her fingers. She'd never written it down, never given it a name. It existed only in her memory and in the muscle memory of her hands. It was hers in a way that Beethoven and Mozart could never be. "Okay," Maya said, so quietly that Alexander had to lean closer to hear her. "I'll try one more song, but this time I play what I want to play." "That's all I was hoping for," Alexander replied. Maya positioned her hands over the keys and took a deep breath. This time, she didn't think about the restaurant or the people watching or even the money. She thought about her family, about working 2 jobs and never having enough, about watching her parents age too quickly from stress, About Diego's brave smile even when he was in pain. She thought about dreams deferred and responsibilities accepted. About love that showed itself through sacrifice rather than words. About the dignity of hard work and the weight of caring for people who depended on you. And then she began to play. Maya's fingers touched the keys so softly that the first notes were barely whispers. She wasn't playing for Alexander anymore, or for the money, or even for the watching crowd. She was playing for the 16-year-old girl who had sat at her grandmother's piano on the worst night of her life. When the eviction notice had arrived and her world felt like it was falling apart, the melody started simple and sad, like rain beginning to fall. Each note carried the weight of that terrible winter when her father lost his job at the factory. Maya remembered coming home from school to find her parents sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by unpaid bills, and her mother crying quietly into her hands. As the music grew, Maya's fingers found a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Song wasn't written down anywhere. It lived only in her memory and in the pain that had created it. She'd played it alone in the dark, night after night, until it became as familiar as breathing. The restaurant around her began to change without Maya noticing. Conversations grew quieter. Forks were set down gently on plates. A businessman at table 7 looked up from his phone for the first time all evening. The couple by the window stopped their argument about vacation plans and turned toward the piano. Maya's music told a story that needed no words. It spoke of mornings when there wasn't enough food for everyone, so parents pretended they weren't hungry. It sang about teenagers who gave up school activities because they needed to work instead. It whispered about dreams put on hold and sacrifices made in silence, but the song wasn't just about sadness. As Maya's fingers moved across the keys with growing confidence, the melody began to shift. The same notes that had sounded desperate now carried something else, strength that came from surviving hard times, hope that refused to die even when everything looked impossible. Mrs. Patterson had been moving toward the piano to end this unusual situation, but she stopped mid-step. Something in the music made her think of her own daughter, who was working 3 jobs to put herself through nursing school. She found herself leaning against the wall, listening. The kitchen door cracked open and Carlos peeked out, drawn by the haunting melody. He'd heard plenty of music in his 50 years, but this was different. This wasn't performance music or background noise. This was someone pouring their heart out through their fingertips. Maya's song grew stronger, building layers of melody that seemed to wrap around every person in the room. A woman at table 3 wiped tears from her eyes, thinking about her elderly mother who refused help even though she could barely manage alone. A young man near the bar remembered his brother who died in Afghanistan, and how music had been the only thing that helped him grieve. Alexander stood frozen beside the piano, watching Maya's face. Her eyes were closed now, and she was completely lost in the music. This wasn't the same nervous waitress who'd spilled water on his documents an hour ago. This was someone accessing a deep well of emotion and sharing it with perfect strangers. Melody reached a crescendo that seemed to capture every unspoken struggle in the room. Maya's hands moved across the keys like they were having a conversation with the instrument. She played about working extra shifts to buy medicine for sick family members. She played about loving people so much that you'd rather go without than see them suffer. A server dropping glasses in the kitchen would normally cause everyone to look. Tonight, when it happened, no one even turned their head. They were all trapped in Maya's musical spell, each person hearing their own story reflected in her notes. The song began to quiet, but not in a way that felt like ending. It felt like settling, like coming home after a long journey. Maya played about hope that survived because it had to, about families that stayed together through impossible times, about finding beauty in the middle of struggle. Alexander realized he was holding his breath. In all his years of business dinners and networking events, He'd never experienced anything like this. Maya had somehow created a moment of pure human connection in a room full of strangers. People who normally avoided eye contact with servers were now completely focused on this young woman and her music. The final section of Maya's composition was like a promise. It didn't pretend that hard times were over or that struggles would magically disappear. Instead, it said that some things, love, family, determination, were stronger than any problem. The music spoke about getting up every morning, not because you felt strong, but because people were counting on you. Maya's grandmother had always told her that real music was like a bridge between hearts. Tonight, Maya finally understood what she meant. Her song was connecting everyone in the restaurant to their own memories of difficulty and survival. The wealthy businessman thinking about his immigrant parents. The young couple remembering when they could barely afford rent. The elderly woman recalling raising children alone after her husband passed away. As the song moved toward its conclusion, Maya played about dreams that waited patiently in the background of busy lives. About talents that survived even when there was no time to practice them. About the quiet heroism of ordinary people doing extraordinary things just to take care of the people they loved. The melody grew softer and more gentle, like a lullaby that promised everything would be okay eventually. Not immediately, not without more struggle, but eventually. Maya's fingers caressed the keys as if she were comforting a crying child, offering hope without making unrealistic promises. And then, almost without anyone noticing, the music ended. Maya's hands lifted from the keys and settled in her lap. She opened her eyes and looked around the restaurant for the first time since she'd begun playing. The silence was complete. Not the uncomfortable quiet that sometimes fell over crowds, but something deeper. It was the silence that followed a shared experience. When people needed a moment to process what they'd just witnessed. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the kitchen had gone quiet, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Maya could hear her own heartbeat and the soft hum of the air conditioning. Nothing else. She looked at Alexander, who was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. His usual confident smile was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like surprise. Around the restaurant, people sat motionless, some with tears in their eyes, others just staring at the piano as if trying to understand what had just happened. Maya realized she was shaking again, but not from nervousness this time. Playing that song had taken everything out of her. She'd opened up parts of herself that she usually kept locked away, shared feelings that she normally carried alone. She felt raw and vulnerable, like she just told her deepest secrets to a room full of strangers. Which, in a way, she had. The silence stretched on, becoming almost unbearable. Maya began to wonder if she'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe she'd shared too much. Maybe she'd been too emotional, too personal. Maybe these wealthy people didn't want to hear about struggle and hardship during their expensive dinner. She started to stand up from the piano bench, ready to apologize and escape to the kitchen, when something unexpected happened. From somewhere in the back of the restaurant, someone began to clap. The single clap echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot. Then another person joined in, and another. Within seconds, the entire dining room erupted in applause that seemed to shake the crystal chandeliers above. Maya sat frozen at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the intensity of the response. People weren't just clapping politely like they had after her first song. This was different. Some diners were standing. Others were wiping their eyes. The businessman at table 7 was applauding so hard his face was red. "Bravo!" someone called. Out from the back of the restaurant. "Beautiful!" shouted another voice. The applause continued for what felt like forever, washing over Maya like a warm wave. She looked around the room in amazement. These weren't her friends or family cheering for her. These were complete strangers, wealthy people who probably had nothing in common with her daily struggles. Yet somehow, Her music had reached them in a way she never expected. Alexander was the first to approach the piano. His usual confident expression had been replaced by something Maya had never seen before: genuine humility. He walked slowly, almost carefully, as if he were approaching something sacred. "Maya," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the continuing applause. "I owe you an apology." Maya blinked, confused. "An apology? For what?" "For treating you like entertainment. For putting you on the spot like that." Alexander ran his hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable for the first time all evening. "I thought I was just challenging a waitress to play piano. I didn't realize I was asking an artist to share her soul with a room full of strangers." The applause was finally dying down, but people weren't returning to their conversations. Instead, they were looking toward the piano with expectant faces, as if they were hoping for more. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Alexander asked. "And don't tell me it was just childhood lessons. That song ... That came from somewhere deeper." Maya felt tears starting to form in her eyes. Nobody had ever called her an artist before. "My grandmother taught me the basics when I was little, but that song ... I wrote it myself. During a really hard time in my life." "You composed that? The whole thing? It's not written down anywhere." "I just ... I played what I was feeling." Maya's voice was shaky. She still couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Before Alexander could respond, other people began approaching the piano. An older woman with kind eyes was the first to reach them. "Excuse me, dear," she said to Maya, her voice trembling slightly. "I just wanted to thank you. That music ... It reminded me of something I thought I'd forgotten." "What do you mean?" Maya asked. The woman's eyes grew distant. "My husband passed away 3 years ago. We were married for 47 years, and he used to play piano for me every evening after dinner. Not fancy music, just simple songs that made me feel loved. I haven't been able to listen to piano music since he died. It hurt too much." She paused, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "But tonight, when you played, I didn't feel sad. I felt grateful. Grateful for all those years of music he gave me. Your song helped me remember the joy instead of just the loss." Maya didn't know what to say. She'd never imagined that her music could help someone process grief. A younger man appeared beside the elderly woman. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I had to tell you something too." He looked at Maya with intense eyes. "I was having the worst day of my life when I came in here tonight. Lost my job this morning, and I was sitting over there trying to figure out how to tell my wife and kids." He gestured toward a table by the window. "But your music, it reminded me that I've survived hard times before. It made me remember that losing a job isn't the end of the world. It's just another challenge to get through." More people were gathering around the piano now, each with their own story about how Maya's music had affected them. A middle-aged woman talked about her daughter who was struggling with depression. A young father mentioned his son who had special needs. An elderly man shared memories of immigrating to America with nothing but hope. Maya listened to each story with growing amazement. She'd played one song, but each person had heard something different in it. Something that connected to their own life, their own struggles, their own hopes. Alexander stood quietly beside the piano, watching the impromptu gathering with fascination. As a successful businessman, he was used to commanding rooms, directing conversations, being the center of attention. But tonight, he was witnessing something he'd never seen before: authentic human connection, happening spontaneously. Mrs. Patterson appeared at his elbow, looking concerned. "Mr. Chun, I'm so sorry about this disruption. I can move Maya back to her regular duties if you'd prefer." "No," Alexander said firmly. "Don't you dare move her. This is..." He paused, searching for the right words. "This is the most real thing I've experienced in years." A woman at the edge of the growing crowd spoke up. "Are you a professional musician?" Do you have albums we can buy? Maya shook her head, feeling embarrassed again. No, I'm just a waitress. I play piano as a hobby when I have time. Just a waitress? The older woman who'd spoken first looked shocked. Dear, you have a gift. A real gift. You shouldn't be hiding it. I'm not hiding it, Maya protested. I just ... I have responsibilities. My family needs me to work. I can't make a living playing piano. Alexander had been listening to this exchange with growing interest. Suddenly, he understood something about Maya that he'd missed before. She wasn't just talented. She was trapped by circumstances beyond her control. Can I ask you something personal? Alexander said to Maya as the crowd around them continued to chat quietly. Maya nodded, still overwhelmed by everything that was happening. If money wasn't an issue, if you could support your family and still pursue music, would you want to study piano seriously? Maybe even perform professionally? The question hit Maya like a physical blow. It was something she'd dreamed about secretly for years, but never allowed herself to consider seriously. That's not really possible for someone like me, someone like you, someone who has to work to survive, someone whose family depends on them. Maya's voice was matter-of-fact, without self-pity. Dreams are luxuries I can't afford. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, studying Maya's face. Around them, the other diners were slowly returning to their tables, but the atmosphere in the restaurant had completely changed. People were talking more quietly, more thoughtfully. The music had created a mood of reflection that lingered in the air. What if I told you there might be a way? Alexander said finally. A way to what? A way to pursue your music and still take care of your family. Would you be interested in hearing about it? Maya looked at him suspiciously. After years of struggling, she'd learned to be wary of offers that sounded too good to be true. What kind of way? Alexander smiled, but it wasn't his usual confident businessman smile. It was something softer, more genuine. Let me tell you a little bit about what I do for a living, and then I'll explain what I'm thinking. The restaurant was returning to normal around them, but Maya felt like her world had just shifted on its axis. An hour ago, she'd been a waitress trying to make it through another double shift. Now she was sitting at a piano, surrounded by people who'd been moved by her music, talking to a millionaire about possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. She thought about Diego in his hospital bed, about her parents working themselves to exhaustion, about all the dreams she'd put aside to focus on survival. Okay, she said quietly. I'm listening. Alexander pulled out his phone and showed Maya a picture of a modern glass building with Chun Technologies written across the front. I started this company 10 years ago with an app that helped people find local musicians for events. It grew into something much bigger, but music has always been at the heart of what we do. Maya stared at the image, trying to process what she was hearing. She'd served dinner to tech billionaires before, but she'd never actually talked to one about their work. Every year, we host a charity gala to raise money for arts education in underserved communities, Alexander continued. We bring in professional musicians, but the most powerful moments always come from people like you, people who have real stories to tell through their music. I don't understand what you're suggesting, Maya said, though her heart was starting to race with possibilities she didn't dare name. Alexander sat down on the piano bench beside her, his voice becoming more serious. I'm suggesting that I sponsor your musical education. Full tuition to whatever music school you choose, plus a living allowance that would cover your family's expenses while you study. Maya's mouth fell open. That's impossible. Why? Would you do that for a stranger? Because what happened here tonight proved something I've suspected for years. The most moving music doesn't come from people who've had easy lives. It comes from people who've struggled, who've loved deeply, who've had to make sacrifices. Alexander gestured around the restaurant. Look what you did to this room with one song. Imagine what you could do with proper training and the right opportunities. Maya shook her head, overwhelmed. I can't accept charity. My family has pride. This isn't charity, Alexander interrupted. This is an investment. In return for funding your education, you'd agree to perform at our annual gala and help us develop programs for other talented people who are stuck in situations like yours. The offer was so far beyond anything Maya had ever imagined that she couldn't quite believe it was real. You're serious? You'd really pay for music school? Dead serious. But there's one condition. Alexander's expression became more businesslike. I want you to perform at our gala next month. 500 of the most influential people in the arts community will be there. If you can move them the way you moved this restaurant tonight, it could open doors you never knew existed. Maya felt dizzy. A month ago, her biggest worry had been whether she could afford Diego's medication. Now she was being offered a chance to completely transform her life. I need to think about this, she said quietly. And I need to talk to my family. Of course, take all the time you need. Alexander handed her a business card. But Maya, don't let fear make this decision for you. I've seen a lot of talented people in my life, and most of them play it safe. They stick with what's familiar instead of reaching for what's possible. Over the next few days, Maya's life turned upside down. In the best possible way. Word had gotten out about her performance at Lumiere, partly because one of the diners had recorded part of her song on his phone and posted it online. The video went viral within hours. Maya watched in amazement as thousands of people shared the clip, adding comments about how her music had made them cry or think about their own families. Music bloggers wrote articles about the waitress with the golden touch. Local news stations wanted to interview her. But the most meaningful response came from her own family. When Maya told her parents about Alexander's offer, her mother cried. For 10 minutes straight. Her father, who rarely showed emotion, hugged her so tightly she could barely breathe. Mia, your grandmother would be so proud, her mother whispered. She always said you had music in your soul. Diego's reaction was the best of all. When Maya visited him in the hospital and explained what had happened, his whole face lit up. I knew it. I always knew you were meant to do something special with music. But what about my job at the restaurant? What about helping with your medical bills? Maya asked. Maya, listen to me, Diego said, suddenly serious despite being only 17. You've been taking care of everyone else your whole life. It's time for you to take care of your dreams too. The night of Alexander's gala arrived faster than Maya expected. She stood backstage at the city's most prestigious concert hall, wearing a simple black dress that Alexander's assistant had helped her choose. Through the curtains, she could see 500 people in elegant evening wear, chatting over champagne and appetizers. You ready? Alexander appeared beside her, looking handsome in his tuxedo, but somehow less intimidating than he had that first night at the restaurant. I'm terrified, Maya admitted. These people are used to hearing professional musicians. What if I'm not good enough? Maya, you're going to be fine. Remember what you told me that night at Lumiere? You said real music comes from the heart, not from training. Alexander smiled. You have more heart than anyone I've ever met. When Maya walked onto the stage, the chatter in the audience quieted. She sat at the grand piano, which was even more beautiful than the one at the restaurant. For a moment, she was overwhelmed by the size of the room and the expectant faces staring back at her. Then she thought about her grandmother, who had first taught her that music was a gift meant to be shared. She thought about Diego, cheering her on from his hospital bed. She thought about her parents, who had worked so hard to give their children better opportunities. Maya placed her hands on the keys and began to play. This time, she didn't play the song from the restaurant. Instead, she played something new, something she'd composed during the week since that life-changing night. This piece was about hope, about second chances, About what happens when someone believes in your potential, even when you don't believe in it yourself. The audience listened in complete silence, just as the restaurant diners had. But this time, Maya wasn't nervous. She knew she belonged on this stage. She knew she had something valuable to offer. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. People stood, cheering and calling for an encore. But Maya was looking for one face in particular. Alexander was standing in the wings, tears in his eyes, clapping harder than anyone. 6 months later, Maya started classes at the state's most prestigious music conservatory. Her family had moved to a better apartment closer to the school, and Diego's health was improving with proper medical care. Maya's parents had been able to reduce their working hours and actually spend time together, for the first time in years. But the most amazing thing was the scholarship program that Maya and Alexander had developed together. They'd created a fund to help other talented young people who were trapped by financial circumstances, just like Maya had been. Every month, Maya received letters from scholarship recipients, telling her how music had changed their lives. Some were single mothers who dreamed of becoming professional singers. Others were teenagers who taught themselves guitar in between jobs. Each story reminded Maya of how lucky she was to have been in the right place at the right time. Looking back, Maya often thought about that night at Lumiere. She'd walked into work expecting just another difficult shift, serving wealthy people who barely noticed her existence. She'd never imagined that spilling water on some business documents would lead to a conversation that would change everything. But the most important lesson hadn't been about music or opportunity or even following dreams. It had been about the power of authentic human connection. When Maya had stopped trying to impress people and started sharing her real self through music, everything had changed. She learned that sometimes the most extraordinary things happen when you're brave enough to be vulnerable, when you're willing to let strangers see who you really are beneath the surface. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, one of those strangers turns out to be someone who can help you transform, not just your own life, but the lives of countless others who are still waiting for their moment to shine.